Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're wading into, well, the really complex world of high tariffs. We've gathered quite a bit of analysis on what they actually do, their ultimate impact. And our goal really is to unpack the true consequences, maybe the surprising ones, looking beyond just the stated aims.
Yeah, absolutely. And if there's one thing that just jumped out from all this research, it's that high tariffs, well, they almost always end up causing widespread economic damage. Damage that lasts, and it really outweighs any small short-term gains you might see.
Okay, let's unpack that then. When a country imposes these really high tariffs, what actually happens inside that country first?
Well, the first sort of critical point is who pays. The research is pretty clear. The cost of tariffs. It lands almost entirely on domestic consumers and businesses. Foreign producers don't really absorb it. Think of it almost like a regressive tax.
Regressive meaning it hits lower-income households harder.
Exactly. It takes a bigger percentage of their income.
Yeah.
Our sources looked at potential 2025 U.S. tariffs, and they projected those could bump up the overall consumer price level by, say, 2.1% to 2.3%.
Okay, what does that mean for an actual household?
It translates to an average income loss somewhere between $2,800 and $3,800 per year per household.
Wow, that's significant. And where would you maybe see that most obviously, like specific products?
Oh, absolutely. You'd see it directly. For instance, those same potential tariffs. They were estimated to cause, in the short run, like a 44% price increase for shoes and leather goods.
44%.
Yeah, huge. And apparel, clothes, around 40%. So you feel that directly when you're shopping.
Okay, so costs go up. What about jobs?
Yeah.
Isn't the argument often about protecting or creating domestic jobs?
That's the labor market paradox we see in the analysis. Yes, tariffs can create some jobs in the specific industries being protected. They're very visible jobs. Remember the 2018 washing machine tariffs? They created about 1,800 jobs. Sounds okay, right?
On the surface.
But the cost per job was staggering over $815,000 for each job created.
$800,000
Yeah.
for one job.
Yep, more than a house in many places. And here's the real kicker. Those small, expensive gains are consistently swamped by much bigger job losses across the rest of the economy. For those broader 2025 tariffs we mentioned, the estimates were a net loss of somewhere between 641,000 and 740,000 jobs total.
A huge net loss. Okay, so that's the domestic picture.
Yeah.
But these things don't happen in a vacuum, right? What about beyond the borders?
Exactly. The ripples spread globally. Targeted nations don't just sit there. They retaliate. They impose their own tariffs.
Right, tit for tat.
Precisely. We saw this clearly. When the U.S. put on tariffs, China and the EU hit back immediately, and they were smart about it. They targeted politically sensitive American goods, things like soybeans, impacting farmers, or iconic brands like Harley-Davidson motorcycles, aiming for maximum political pain.
And this back and forth, it messes with supply chains.
Totally. It leads to what economists call trade diversion. Companies scramble to shift production or sourcing away from tariff-hit countries. So you might see, say, Vietnam or Mexico gain some market share, not necessarily because they're the most efficient, but because they avoid the tariffs. The sources call this whole process the Great Unraveling. It's a forced, often chaotic, and really costly reshuffling of these intricate global value chains. And all that creates this fog of uncertainty that makes businesses hesitant to make long-term investments.
It sounds like a huge, messy, global game of musical chairs for manufacturers.
Mm-hmm.
Has this kind of thing happened before? Is there a historical parallel?
Unfortunately, yes. There's a very stark warning from history. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act in the U.S. back in 1930, it jacked up U.S. tariffs to nearly 60% on average. The result, global trade absolutely cratered, fell by about 2/3. And most historians agree it significantly worsened the Great Depression. It's a really sobering precedent, isn't it?
It certainly is.
And beyond the pure economics, the ultimate impact gets geopolitical. You start seeing economic ties used as weapons, this weaponization of economic interdependence, as it's called. It erodes trust even among allies and contributes to a world that feels more fragmented, less stable, and ultimately less prosperous and more dangerous.
So wrapping this up, as you, our listener, try to make sense of this increasingly complex global economy, what's the main takeaway here?
I think the overwhelming evidence across all these analyses points in one direction. High tariffs are just not an effective tool for building broad, lasting economic prosperity. In fact, they tend to do the opposite. They generally make a nation poorer, not richer, and they introduce significant instability into the global system.
So here's a final thought for you to chew on. In this volatile era we're in, How does this change the way you think about global supply chains? And what does real resilience look like if relying on economic connections increasingly feels like a vulnerability, not just a strength?